Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Serve Brew podcast. My name is Bree Russell, and I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. If you're a regular listener, you probably have recognized that I am not your normal host, the amazing one and only Tori Townley, who we all love and adore. She unfortunately isn't able to be on today, so she asked me if I would fill in for her. She is one of my all-time besties, and I get to have the privilege of serving alongside her with all things Servolution. And I feel like today, though, I have some pretty big shoes to fill. However, when she told me who I was getting to interview and chat with, I couldn't pass it up because I have always wanted to sit down and chat with him. And he actually was one of my college professors back in ministry school. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce him. Hey, Kevin, you want to say hey to our listeners?
Hey, I'm so glad to be a part of this. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on today. I want to go into a little bit deeper to why I'm so excited to get to sit down and chat with you. But before we do that, I cannot move on. I cannot move forward without asking one very important question. I would not do this podcast justice if I did not ask our all-time icebreaker question. So, okay, Kevin, what is your way of drinking your coffee? Or do you even drink coffee?
Oh, I do. I was a barista for Caribou Coffee when we were in Charlotte, and we're part of a church plant. So we have a nice machine at home. So I'm kind of a snob when it comes to this. I do use Starbucks. I use Starbucks beans that I get, but I have my own espresso machine, and I go to Tuesday Morning or Home Goods and get their sugar-free syrup. So my go-to would be 4 pumps of sugar-free caramel and sugar-free mocha with a mixture of almond milk and heavy cream and 6 shots.
Whoa, okay, yes. That is a way to do it. Wow, that's dedicated right there.
Definitely.
Well, I have my coffee with me, and I actually I got my Highlands College mug.
Awesome. Good.
In honor of you. So, and great. Telling all our listeners. So, like I said, you were my professor back in Highlands College, and I had you for one of my intro to preaching classes. I had you for like a deep dive into the book of Acts. However, I always wanted to get into your evangelism class that you taught. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because I also had the privilege of serving alongside you at the Birmingham Dream Center. I was in the outreach practicum, and then I also had the privilege of interning and then being on staff with the Birmingham Dream Center. So got to serve alongside you a lot. And anytime I was on the admin side, so I'd get numbers in, and I always knew when we had numbers, a lot, and I would say it was a good many numbers coming back for salvations, I always knew Pastor Kevin Bussey was out there. And so Pastor Kevin, I just want to honor you, and I just for just your heart for outreach and for your heart for sharing the gospel. And that's really why when me and Tori were talking, we wanted to bring you on, because you have such a gift for sharing the gospel. And I want to dive into that. I want you to share your wisdom with our listeners. But before we do that, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how did you get involved in outreach?
Okay. Well, I was born into a ministry family. My dad worked for Youth for Christ Campus Life for over 30 years. And then my parents just retired for the second time last month from Campus Crusade, which is now called Cru. So I had that ministry mindset all along. I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where my dad was Youth for Christ director there, but they now live in South Carolina. And I knew I was called to ministry in high school, but in the denomination I was at that time, they kind of scared me when I went off to the college I went to. So I sort of floundered around. I mean, I was never rebellious. I didn't do anything with it. And then I became a high school football coach at a church, at a school up in Huntsville, Alabama, Madison. And we got involved in a real good church there. There wasn't a Highlands at the time, but I mean, it was a real good church and they were very evangelistic. And I went to one of their evangelism training programs that we went and just did visitations, what they called it. And I started seeing fruit. So that's kind of how that all happened. But I know I didn't, to tell you a little more about me. I've been married, we'll be married 34 years to my wife, Cass, who works here at Highlands. She's on the SCU side, our partner school. She's the admissions representative. We have 2 children, our son, Jacob, and his wife, Hannah, and we just had our first grandbaby 2 weeks ago. Her name's Hallie. And then our daughter, Hope, is a graduate of Highlands College, and she's on staff at a church up in Madison, Alabama, Cross Point. She's the social media and graphic designer, and she's getting married this October. So we got a long line of ministry. So love that. When I felt finally though called to ministry, we decided to go. And I was telling someone about this yesterday. Our reason for going to seminary out in Fort Worth, Texas, was not really spiritual. We looked at there or New Orleans, and the reason we ended up in Fort Worth was because Cass, my wife, has a social work degree, and Texas would just take a $50 check and give her, allow her to move over, where in New Orleans she would have had to have a master's degree. So I would like to say it's more spiritual than that, but that's why we ended up there. But
God uses it all.
And I was on staff at a church while we were in Fort Worth. I was a youth minister. And then in Jacksonville, North Carolina, I was a youth minister. And then my home pastor called me back to his church when he moved to Atlanta. And I was an evangelism pastor at his church. And then we planted a church. And I've also been a transition pastor. And then we came back here almost 14 years ago, where I've been working with the workplace ministry until just recently. And I was telling you before we recorded that I'm now full-time with Highlands as of last week. Yeah, so excited about that.
That is so exciting. Well deserved. And I love your family. I got to be with them when I was in Highlands College. Me and your daughter hope we're in some classes together. And so just love your heart, love your family, and just everything you do. God is just definitely, there's anointing on your life and your family. And I love that y'all do it all together. And that's just great. That's so cool. Well, okay. So you told us a little bit about your journey of just into ministry, and which of course we all know as Christians that we all have the goal to reach people with the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, he says, go therefore and make disciples. So, but you have just an amazing gift. And I saw it at the Birmingham Dream Center, and of just reaching people, sharing the gospel, having gospel conversations. I mean, you can say the gift of evangelism. Some people might think that word's a little old school, but I mean, you have the gift of evangelism, and you're able to have gospel conversations in such a down to earth, no strings attached kind of way that offers people hope. And I want you to kind of dive in to how that passion developed in you. You have the gift. How did, as Paul says in the Bible, how did you fan that into flame, that gift?
Okay. That's a good question. When we were up in Huntsville, I was a high school football coach, and we were going to church. We were very active, but I just didn't feel fulfilled. And so I went and talked to my pastor about it. And at that time, I also changed and started selling wire. And I was traveling around the country. Half the week I was out of town, and then other week I was in there making calls, trying to get appointments for the next week. And but I kept feeling this call to ministry. And so I talked to my pastor about it, and he said, if you could do anything else, I'd be happy to do it. So I don't know if that was a good thing or not, but I put out a fleece, and I gave God my job, and 3 days later, the whole sales force was let go. And so we kind of thought, well, that's a sign that we're going to seminary. And And so we went to Fort Worth, Texas. And while I was there, they encouraged us to get a church. It's not like Highlands College where they really have the practicums. We didn't have practicums in the seminary. So if you're going to get any kind of practical ministry, you had to do it on your own. And so I became a youth minister at a church in North Fort Worth, and just started seeing a lot of fruit of leading students to Christ. And it just, when I got my first full-time position was out of seminary, I went to Jacksonville, North Carolina, where Camp Lejeune Marine Base is. And it was a very traditional church, but they had a lot of Marines there. And I guess I took my training from watching my dad with Campus Life, View for Christ Campus Life. And we basically did a parachurch ministry within the church. And we started seeing hundreds of students come to Christ. It was a youth ministry of about 20. And by the time I left, it was well in the hundreds. And I just kept seeing people come to Christ there. And what was really exciting to me is when some of my students would lead their friends to Christ. That even made me more excited. Yeah. And then my home pastor moved from Huntsville to Atlanta, and he just knew I had to get to evangelism, and he called me to come be his evangelism pastor. Now, I was encouraged to train with a denominational way of training at that time, and I'm very grateful for my training, my heritage, but I didn't like the way we were doing it because it was that knock on doors, and it wasn't a matter of bringing anything to anyone. It was just trying to get them into your church. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I read a book, because I know later on I'm supposed to give you some recommendations, but I read a book by Bill Hybels and Mark Mecklenburg called Becoming a Contagious Christian. And I read it and I thought, that's me, because it wasn't a matter of forcing anything on anyone. It was just a matter of being a lifestyle evangelism and sharing your faith. Mm-hmm. And so, but I had to teach the way that they taught us. And it was this method that you use your fingers and you spelled out the word faith. And again, I'm not opposed to anything. Any evangelism training is great, but it was kind of hokey. But I remember I was also the singles pastor, and so I went to a singles metro. It was all these large church pastors, and we met down and we got to suffer in Naples, Florida, at the Ritz-Carlton. And at dinner, everyone was buzzing about this evangelism training. They said, "Hey, have any of y'all been through it?" And I had just gone through it, and they said, "Well, hey, try it on our waitress." Well, I'd like to tell you I prayed about it, but I didn't. But next thing I know, I led the waitress to Christ, and they're all with their mouths open. And I'm like, but evangelism works as long as you do it. And then the next day, my rental car had a flat, and they sent somebody out to fix it, and I led him to Christ. So it was just, I think once you get that training, it's just like you just want to start doing it. And it's kind of a joke. My wife knows that I have it, and we went on some of the work that she was with, and we went to Dallas. We flew to Dallas a few years ago, since we've been in Birmingham, and they picked us up in I wouldn't say a limo, but it was a limo driver in a SUV. And before you knew it, my wife, I saw her, she's had this little smirk on her face. She was like, "You don't know what you're into," because I was there sharing the gospel with this guy. So it's just what I do. I mean, it's just kind of natural.
It's just who you are.
Yeah,
that's so
it is.
Cool.
I mean,
but I love that you're saying, like, you did have some training now. Mm-hmm. And I would say I grew up in a church, and I'm thankful for some of the ways I was taught to be able to share the gospel. I was actually thinking about it earlier today, because today is actually 15 years that I have been walking with Jesus. I got saved June 7th, 2007. So wow. So I love that we're getting to be on here and talk about sharing the gospel, because, from the moment I experienced Jesus, I had a heart to reach people as well. And that's why we're, me and you both love outreach and reaching people. And I was trained, I had some training, but I do feel like, especially in the world we're living in today, it's kind of a modern post-Christian, even post-COVID world now. And knowing how to share that gospel to people, sometimes not say, like you said, you can't discredit any way of reaching people, but what is the most effective way to reach people in the world we live in today? And I think you've been on a journey of just taking the gift you had, taking the training you had, and discovering like what's effective for the people God places in my path. And so I would love for you to just give us some of your thoughts on one, how you think evangelism has evolved over time, and especially in this, we kind of live in a crazy world right now, and how we can effectively reach people with the gospel. What is your process? What is your method, you could say, but I know it just naturally comes from you, but just giving some practical to our listeners.
Well, yeah, I'd be glad to. And I guess I need to start first to let you know that I wasn't always like this. I became a Christian when I was 5 years old. I mean, I really believe I was, but I became a Pharisee. Our church was good, but it was so conservative. It was almost like we looked down on everybody. And growing up in Tuscaloosa, it's a wild town. You know, everybody you saw, I would look down on them. In fact, my dad's staff even had to tell him that I was hindering their ministry because I was so snobby. And what happened, and it's almost like I joke with it. It was like I was the Grinch, and my heart needed to break. And what happened is, not a friend, my best friend. I mean, my best friend in the world, who was in my discipleship group with me, he got his girlfriend pregnant. And had it been anyone else, I would have been lobbing, accusations toward him, but it was my best friend. And I saw the way my church treated him, and he eventually got out of church. And just recently I got back in touch with him, and we're going to get back together. But I think my heart broke then, because it wasn't just a friend, it was my best friend. And so I think that's what changed me, to where I started seeing people through the eyes of them being people, not what they're doing. And so now I look at everybody as someone that God loves. And in seminary, I had a professor who's shaped my life forever, Dr. Roy Fish. He passed away a few years ago, but he said that it takes the average person 7 times to hear the gospel. And he looked at us, he goes, "Are you willing to be number 6? And so I've thought about that over and over and over. And I'm also a hockey fan. I know being in the South is kind of funny, but I love Wayne Gretzky, and people joke about this quote, but I think about it in evangelism, that he says you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Well, in evangelism, I think the same way. If you don't share your faith, no one's going to hear the gospel. So all that happened. And then about 14 years ago, I went on staff with a workplace ministry, and our founder was a man named Mark Kress, and he taught me something that has changed my ministry forever. It's called permission-based evangelism. And so anytime I'm sharing with someone, I'll say, "Hey, is it okay if I share with you about something that's made a difference in my life?" If they don't have a church background, I kind of do what Andy Stanley talks about. I don't even mention the Bible. I just say, well, Paul, who was a follower of Jesus, said this. But if they have a church background of any sort, I'll say the Bible says, but I'll say, is it okay if I share with you? If they say no, I don't worry about it. I mean, I'm concerned for them, but I back off, because I learned years ago that it's not up to me to lead people to Christ. It's up to the Holy Spirit. My job is just to share. And so permission has changed everything. And so I'll never forget the first time I went to the Dream Center. Kevin Farmer, who was one of my former students, he was there, and he invited me to come. And the first Sunday I went out, I was just kind of observing. And this lady, other lady, was her first time. Well, about the third or fourth door, I don't know, it just kind of kicked in for me, and I started sharing. And the next thing I know, I led someone to Christ. And she looked at me. She goes, "I thought this was your first time." And I kind of laughed. I said, "Well, I'm kind of a ringer." So
yeah.
I mean, so I haven't stopped going ever since. Yeah. And so the permission has changed everything. And so that's what I try to teach anyone. If you ask somebody permission, if they give you permission, then how are they going to argue with you when you start sharing with them?
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I feel like that just, what you were saying about, are you willing to be number 6 and not number 7 when sharing the gospel with somebody? I think that that requires some humility on our side, and really it's letting God be God, and because he's the one who ultimately changes people's lives. So I love that. And I kind of feel like it takes the pressure off of us just a little bit. Not feeling like we have to be the one to lead them in that prayer every time, but just being willing to share the gospel with them. And
exactly.
Like I love that. And what you were saying about asking permission, like that's good. That's good stuff right there. Like, I feel like for me, that just like changes it. Like, can I share with you? Like, and if they say yes, like you were saying, there's nothing they can say to that. And it's a very, it takes away where I feel like for believers and for individuals in outreach and the kind of how we feel like we're invading a little bit and we don't want it to be awkward or weird. We're not trying to be that. We're not trying to hit you on the side of the head with the Bible, but asking permission just takes all that away. So I love that. That is awesome. Wow. So, what encouragement would you have? So I feel like there's a lot of listeners on here who they're like, man, I love what he's doing, but I don't know if I could. Like, that's a spiritual gift for evangelism. I do outreach, I'll do acts of kindness, but sharing the gospel, or maybe for an individual who's like, yeah, I have the gift of sharing the like evangelism, and I want to develop it more. So what can we do to really, you just gave us one amazing practical tip, but what can we do to kind of fan into flame that boldness to even ask that permission, to have those conversations with people?
Well, again, that's a good question. First of all, I think we have to remember the Holy Spirit's the one that does the saving. And when I finally realized that, it took all the pressure off, because it's not up to me to lead anyone to Christ, but my job is to share. Matthew 28, it says to go make disciples, go baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So I'm supposed to go out and share the gospel. Now, for someone that doesn't feel led, it doesn't feel like they have that gift, I understand that. But I also know that my wife, although we joke, she says she doesn't have this gift anymore, but I always thought she's had the gift of mercy. And I don't have the gift of mercy, but I'm still supposed to be merciful. And, at Highlands, we have those kindness cards that we hand out. And I have some in my wallet, and there are times where people come up and hit me up for money or gas or something. And so I'm still supposed to be merciful. And so even though that's not a spiritual gift, if I have the fruit of the Spirit, I'm supposed to have all the gifts. And so the same with evangelism. You may not have the gift of evangelism, but we're still supposed to share. And the beauty of I don't know what all the other churches do it, but I know here at Highlands, we make it so simple. If you just invite them, then they're going to hear the gospel. So I would say build relationships with people. But I ask a lot of questions. I mean, when we're and I know it sounds crazy, even the door to door when we're passing out groceries, but I just ask them questions. Well, tell me about this, tell me about that, and don't ask them questions that are open-ended to where they have to tell you more about it. When we ask to pray for people when we're going on our door-to-door teams at the Dream Center, and whatever they pray for, I pray for. I've had someone in my workplace ministry ask me to pray for a weld. And you may think, well, a weld, that's kind of funny, but he could lose his job if the weld isn't good. And they make drawbridges, so you want them to make sure they're good. But I prayed for it. And so the next week I asked him how it went, and it opened up conversations. So as long as it's nothing illegal, I'll pray for anything. So, and just ask them about their family, ask them about how they're feeling. Ask them, if you ask lots of questions, then that builds a relationship. And I think you can build relationships on the spot with someone if you just get to know them right there.
Yeah. And I think what you just said is so important, the relational component behind sharing the gospel. That's how Jesus did things. He did things relationally. And that's when we're going into those conversations, you don't want to just go straight into that question of like, do you know if you're going to heaven or hell? Because
right.
I don't know you. I'm not going to share that. I'm not going to answer that. Like that, people don't receive that well when you go into it without that relationship, but and I love what you were saying, and I think this is the heart of outreach, when you do something to meet one of their needs, when you show you care, when you through acts of kindness, which is what we're all about in Servolution. That's what we're inspiring, is acts of kindness. And the goal of those acts of kindness is to just show people, that
Right.
there is hope and there is love still in this world. And I believe it also helps you build that relationship with people. And when you offer to pray for people, and then what you did, you followed up with it. You asked them later, like, how'd this go? And that, I think, builds trust and builds relationship. And I love how you're like, it's not even just a one-time thing, sometimes it's a process. And so I love that. I love how you go about it and the relational component to it. And so you're in the Birmingham Dream Center world. I would love to get your thoughts on, because Serve Day is coming up. And
Oh, my favorite day of the year.
It's my favorite day too. So excited. And it's a day where churches all across the world are going to go out and do acts of kindness. We're going to love on our cities and our communities. And so for you, because you were talking about this, why do you think it's important for us to proceed with acts of kindness? Or why do you think, days such as Serve Day are important for sharing the gospel? And then how can we, on days such as Serve Day, share the gospel? Or should we just wait for the opportunity? How do we navigate that? What is your thought process when you go into Serve Day or into First Saturday serves? Are you going in like, I'm going to share the gospel with somebody, or is it, we're just going to see how it goes?
I always have plans to share the gospel. I mean, just wherever I'm always looking for, I pray every day. There's 2 prayers I pray. I pray for wisdom, James 1:5. In fact, it was your brother who caught me in class. I said I wanted to be the wisest man ever, and he goes, "Didn't the Bible say Solomon was going to be the wisest man ever?" So that's kind of a joke.
My brother being cheeky.
Yeah. But the second prayer I pray is for eyes to see and ears to hear. I pray it every day. And so wherever I'm looking, I'm like an athlete with my head on swivel and just looking for any opportunity for God to give me to share the gospel and share the love of Christ. So I go into every First Saturday serve anytime I'm anywhere looking for someone to share the gospel with. So I'm doing that. I realize not everybody feels as comfortable with it, but I think you just have to try it. And I would say that don't ever do ministry alone. And so what I always try to do is I invite students to come with me, and it doesn't affect their grade. I say, this doesn't have anything to do with your grade, but I've gotten now a reputation of seeing fruit, so students want to come. Yeah. And so here's how I do it. I'll take them out and I'll say, look, you don't have to talk at first. I said, so I'll do it first. And then if they see some things going on, and then when they get a little more comfortable, they start knocking on the doors and maybe opening up. And then I'll even get it to a certain point with the gospel. And in fact, Hamid, who's here at Highlands College, he went with me one time when he was still a student. And it got to the point where I said, is it okay if we share with you about how you can have a relationship with God? And the person said, yes. And I turned around and I said, Hamid, why don't you share with them? And he was like, so I kind of put him on the spot, but that's kind of how I do with them is to help train people. And then after that, then you start letting them do it themselves. And so the last couple of months, I've seen a student named Sterling and a student named Michael who are here, who are now be second and third semester students this next term. They got to lead their first people to Christ. And so I think it's amazing when you could do things like that. So I would just say, just start doing something. I'm not against tracts. I mean, if someone wants to use a tract, it's fine. I don't personally use them because I don't want it to look like I'm trying to sell something. But I understand the purpose of tracts sometimes to help walk people through. So whatever it takes to share the gospel, that's good. There are also Bibles, that have markings in them you can use. Mm-hmm. But you have to understand sometimes you're going to talk to people in some parts of the country that don't even believe the Bible. So that's where you talk about, followers of Jesus, Paul and Peter and others, James, the brother of Jesus. If the brother of Jesus is going to say that his brother's a Messiah, then you have to believe something.
Right.
So that's what I do there. And I don't ever argue with people. It doesn't get you anywhere. And in fact, that could be a whole social media thing to talk about, but I don't ever argue with people. In fact, a great book I just read a couple of weeks ago was Andy Stanley's "Not in it to win it," and I could have written the book because that's kind of how I feel. What he said, arguments don't get us anywhere, and so when I go somewhere and they want to start an argument, I just kind of back off and don't go there because I know that obviously it's not time to do something. Saturday, on our first Saturday serve, there was a guy I shared the gospel with all the way through, and I asked if he was ready to make a decision. He wasn't ready. I don't force anything on anyone. I'm probably skilled enough that I could manipulate someone into making a prayer, but that's not good either, because then it doesn't mean anything.
That's good. That's really good. Like I love all the points you were saying there, not forcing it on people, not manipulating it. That's not what we're trying to do. And that's not what we're trying to do when we're doing acts of kindness or giving groceries to people. We're just trying to show the love of God and hoping it softens people's hearts and opens it to see that there is a better way. There is a way of joy and peace. And so I love that. I love how you go about it. I think that just shows how much you've like developed your gift and the wisdom you have with it, because I think we all start passionate about sharing the gospel and then we have to navigate it. And I think the Holy Spirit helps and teaches us how we can do it in a way that is just truly effective, where you see true fruit. And because that's important. It's not about the number of people, that it's about genuine people coming to Christ. So you want genuine. I love that. I love how you go about it. And I love how you are with your Highlands College students and how you're training them and investing in them. And so we've talked a lot about, as individuals, as believers, as followers of Christ, how we can share the gospel. Now, a lot of our listeners, they're outreach and church leaders. And so they may be like, I'm fired up. I'm going to take this advice. I'm going to share the gospel on my own. But how do I instill it into my teams? How do I train my teams in sharing the gospel? So any advice you would have in just how to encourage, how to fan into flame the passion to share the gospel, like you were doing with your Highlands College students?
Well, I mean, I think it is good to get training of some sort, because if you don't know how to share the gospel, then you're not going to do it. So whether that's reading a book, if it's going to a training at your church or a conference or something like that, that's all good. I've been through Evangelism Explosion and all these other things all throughout the years, and I probably use parts of them in everything I do, but I personally use the Roman road. It's not a road in Rome for anyone. I mean, most of the church people know that, but it's just Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23, Romans 5:8, Romans 10:9 and 10, and Romans 10:13, and I just take people down it. I have those verses memorized, so it just comes out very easily. I also adapt it with the bridge illustration, and when I get to Romans 5:8, where it says God demonstrates his own love towards us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, I tell them, I said, a lot of people want to get to heaven by being a good person, by going to church, and none of it's good enough because there's a big gulf. And I just say that we need a bridge, and that's Jesus. And so I kind of combo those in there. But I would say get some sort of training like that. There's so many things on there that, there's the 3-circle illustration. There's Campus Crew, which used to be Campus Crusade, has some great tools to use. All those are good. I mean, I still think The Master Plan of Evangelism is one of the best books. It's a classic by Robert Coleman. And Becoming a Contagious Christian definitely helped me. And then another book that he wrote called Just a Walk Across the Room. It's just, sometimes you just have to get out of your own self and just say, you know what, I'm nervous, but I'm going to do this anyway. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on this podcast, but Servolution, that book helped me. Years ago, I was a struggling pastor in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I reached out to Pastor Dino when he was still down in Baton Rouge, and his church helped me through doing some kindness evangelism, and I just know that really helped me a lot back then. And so that's why it's kind of funny. The first time I ever went to Highlands he wasn't even pastor here. He was just a guest pastor. And it was like, it was a sign. When I saw him, I thought, okay, I'm good, because I knew who he was. but that's a great book too. And so those all have been good books to help me. And I know one of the questions was also some podcasts. I don't know necessarily any ones that I've seen that are on evangelism. Maybe I need to start one. I don't know. But some that have helped me, Craig Groeschel's leadership podcast, Andy Stanley's leadership podcast, and then the Grow one by Pastor Chris. In fact, the last two, the one Pastor Dino just did, and then Fred Markert did the one before that. I was so pumped about that. And then Carrie Newhoff's podcast is like a must listen to. That's where I get a lot of the books that I listen to. It's by people he has on there. He has a lot of people that are very passionate about evangelism on there. And I use an app called Scribe. It's $10 a month, and it's unlimited books. So I listen to books all the time, and so I don't feel bad if a book's not good after the first chapter. I'll go to another one. But I've gotten a lot of good books on there on evangelism that I've listened to.
Wow, that's incredible. I love hearing all those resources. That's amazing. And I listen to some of those podcasts, and I love them. And of course, Servolution. And then, everything you've just given us in this podcast is just so great. Just these little things that it's like, oh yeah, I can do that. Like no pressure, take it off, asking for permission, and just sharing our faith, sharing our story. And then also, taking the time to invest in training to share the gospel, because that is, why we're here as believers, and we're his ambassadors. So you are just full of so much wisdom. I can't wait to actually go back and re-listen to this podcast and just take notes on everything. So
that's great.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. So before we go, I would love for you just to share maybe a story that, of a gospel conversation you've had with somebody that was just very impactful in your own life.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny. 2 months ago, we were at the Dream Center, and they have a little shopping area where they can get clothes, and a guy was coming out named Michael. And I just started talking to him and asked him about his relationship with God. He had just gotten out of jail, and he was open and let me share the gospel with him. He prayed to receive Christ right there. And then he said, what are y'all doing? And I told him what we were doing. He said, well, can I go with y'all? So we got him a red shirt. I introduced him to Pastor Jamil, who's the Uptown campus pastor. It's going to be Woodlawn as soon as we open that. And said, Pastor Jamil, this is Michael. He just got saved. He's going out with us, and he's going to come tomorrow to get baptized. And I'm sure Pastor Jamil thought, yeah, right. Well, Michael went out with us. We led some more people to Christ, and then he told me he would meet me at church. So I went to Uptown. That's not the campus I normally go to. We go to Grandview, but I went down. My wife and I did, and sure enough, he showed up. Came on the bus. He got baptized. And it was just amazing. I mean, just unbelievable that day. And then one more story that just happened Saturday is a guy named Trevor, who I led to Christ a few months ago. He came on his own to go serve with us and went on our team Saturday. So people say, well, does this always work? Well, not everybody is, but I mean, you go to the parable of the sower, not all the seed sprouts, but there's two stories I can tell you right there that did.
Wow, those stories are my favorite kind of stories. They make my heart so happy. Because sometimes I love those stories where it's like they just see you're out serving, doing things for the community, and they jump in, and then they get a taste of purpose, and they're like, wait, where does this come from? Like, I want more. And then and then people discovering Christ, and then just going on that journey of making a difference for themselves. Like, that's incredible. And that's what Servolution's all about, reaching people and loving people. And then those people who we reach, loving more people. And as Pastor Dino would call it, it's a Servolution. So I love it. And it's all for the glory of God. So thank you, Kevin, so much for coming on today and sharing your wisdom with us, and for honestly building the kingdom for Jesus. Like, you're going to get many crowns in heaven.
Oh, well,
I love doing it. I know it's not why you're doing it, but they're very well deserved. So thank you. And thank you for always encouraging me in sharing the gospel. So well, thank you listeners for jumping on with us today. And we look forward to having you on next time.